Hilary Benn, who was a minister in the last government, actually launched the meanwhile leasing set of regulations based on what Jane had worked out with a legal firm does work for us pro bono, Herbert Smith. So they'd done free work. They, part of their volunteering or their social justice or whatever, they give us free time, and they'd actually worked up a lease to go with Argent. I mean, it was very thick, and I think the government actually used that as a model to make this meanwhile leasing. So that allowed people who wanted to get into a relationship with other contractors to use this model, this agreement, and that was launched from the skip garden. So I was very proud of that.
I'm interested in this notion of edgeland spaces. So we're like right in the heart of a corporate kind of environment, but we're not constrained by it. We're on their doorstep or on their roof, or we're just, so it's a free space in the middle of a very constrained space. But I think the proximity of the two together creates, like in a field, all around, often around the edges of the field, you get the most biodiversity. This was not in the master plan of the developers, and I think that's important. So some of the best things happen in the unplanned spaces, and there is, there's a tribe in Africa that when they build their houses, they always build one room that they've not planned for, and that's where something creative happens. And in a similar way, when we made the skip garden, where we've now got our kitchen and our cafe, we didn't know what was going to be there in that space. It was empty space. So I'm quite interested in that whole kind of designing in empty space. I picked up the phone myself and rang up Argent and got to speak to the CEO, who came down to visit us, and came to visit us, and he just really liked the project and said, this was down the road on this other office building, and he said, I really like the idea that business and activism don't have to be either end of the spectrum. So I built a dialogue over the next couple of years, really, and then he wrote letters of recommendation, this kind of thing. But then he said, well, look, could you come up with an idea where you could have portable gardens on the development site? And it was at that point I spoke to Paul Richens, who's our gardens manager, who was working for us in a part-time capacity at that time. And he said, I've always wanted to do them in skips.
I actually, in my head, had this sort of idea of a garden in a rubbish skip, which seemed very appropriate considering that we're on a building site. So I went away and sort of drew up a sort of proto-plan of how we would actually make this garden in skips, which I presented to the Argent board. Me in my gardener's gear, and them in their suits, and me with my Blue Peter-esque drawings of a skip garden. But they liked it. Every single structure here has been with the back of my mind that it's actually able to be moved. So we have 7 old rubbish skips. They're not fit for purpose anymore. They've all got rotten bottoms, poor things. They were given to us and sponsored by each of the contractors on site. So we have Kier and Bam Nuttall and Carillion and so on, and that's why they're all different colours, because they're the colours, the company colours of those different contractors. My main sort of interaction, I suppose, with people is the twilight gardening. In the summer, I do every fortnight. There's a twilight gardening session, and so we get people coming in from the whole area. So everything from the local contractors to the office workers to local residents to interested people, and then they work on the garden in an evening. So I do a bit of teaching about whatever aspect we're doing, like planting or whatever. I mean, a lot of people have never sown seeds before, so simple stuff like that. Most people live in cities, most people are moving to cities, so why not do systems where even people with very little skills can actually, or a very big place to actually, they haven't got a huge garden, can still grow in containers, but understand how that works and what you need to do for it. And so here, with all the containers and everything else, I'm actually hopefully showing people. I mean, the best comment I ever had was somebody said, well, if you can grow that in one skip, my back garden's bigger than your skip, you know, I can do that. And I thought, that's exactly what I want to hear.
Build that relationship with their employees to be able to give to the young people, but also give them some feedback. It's always, the feedback we always get is that they love getting that fresh perspective from young people and being able to kind of reach out to them and have this connection that normally wouldn't happen because they're business people and they're young people, and it's kind of separate. So we've got Zach, for example. He was 14 when he came to us, and it was, you know, not by choice. He had been looking for work experience, and he happened to get asked for his work experience period at school. And he was like, oh, I wanted to go to an advertising agency, that's what I want to do. And then he loved it, and he became a generator. And now, summer, he's currently at university, and he's studying advertising. And last summer came back to teach our young people, the new generators, about how to film, how to create a storyboard and all that sort of stuff, and made a video about skip garden with them. But he's had internships at Wolf Owens and other kind of business partners that we've had.
I was a generator, just like the youth development they have, where you just go do different things, to meet different people, work on different projects. But they decided to take a step further and made me into a volunteer. So I was kind of a youth leader among the generators. So I was in between staff, me and the generators. So I was kind of the link in between. And yeah, I'd say now I'm just volunteering in my pastime, just to help out and work with different projects and give back. And I was very skeptical when I first received this option of environmental charity. And yeah, for the first few weeks I was really skeptical about the whole project and everything, because me being a young person, you don't necessarily pay attention to the environment. It's whenever I told my friends, oh, I'm volunteering for this and that, like, oh, you're hippie and all that. So it doesn't have the very cool image at first. But yeah, you kind of just do it because you do interesting things. I was doing things that allowed me to express myself creatively, whether that be photography. I was doing public speaking, which is really nerve-wracking for a young person. One thing I'd say I'd learned the most was you don't necessarily have to pay attention to the numbers. Once you change someone's attitude, I think everything else will follow. And I think they certainly changed my attitude towards work, towards just approaching work, approaching doing things. And yeah, they kind of gave me they kind of gave me the platform to develop myself.
I think people have come here before, and one or two have commented on it being ramshackle or quite, you know, some people have said aesthetically, I'm not so sure, and things like that, because we're contrasting with somewhere that's very slick and beautiful and, you know, manicured and everything. But at the same time, our approach is still professional. We still have professional spaces, but in the way we do them. And we've got those relationships for example, in Granary Square, we've got the 2 restaurants who commission us to create their planters outside. And it's kind of that cross, it's finding that what works for, you know, official public realm and what works for a space like this, and finding ways to meet in the middle rather than going, this is, you know, theirs and this is ours, and still creating that separation.
I would say that our capital for the organisation, it's not in the physical things we're doing, it's in our approach and our, if you like, our educational approach, our philosophy, and I think that's transportable anywhere. So we've really set ourselves up to be in a changing situation, and that we don't know where it will end up. But one thing we've tried to stay true to is our values and our approach, and that's what's defined us.
12 years ago. I used to live on a boat on the River Lee, and I discovered this place coming up it on a little rowing boat one day, and was curious about its nature. And about 8 years ago I decided to try and find out who it belonged to. Then when the Lehman Brothers crash happened, I think January the 2nd, I was now living on the other side of Newham in my boat. I decided to, and the Olympics were only a few years away, and I knew nothing was happening with the site. I decided to get back in contact with the key owners, and they got back to me in 15 minutes rather than 6 months, and a 4 years worth of negotiations with them started. After 4 years we formed a charity, myself and other local people, to act as a vehicle to regenerate the site, and that's how it started. The idea is that Gasworks Partnership will be an incubator to social enterprises, and we have a limited company as well as a charity, and the limited company, not-for-profit, is the initial incubator, and as each social enterprise becomes profitable, then it becomes its own kick, its own social community interest company. Everything that we're doing here at the moment, probably for the next 5 years, is being done in a temporary nature, because we want to let the site develop and respond to what's out there. So every planter is movable, all the venues are movable, our offices are movable, our studios are movable. Having that flexibility is really good, but it was very important for us early on to establish and be able to tell the local community, this is for the long term. I've been to the meetings, you know, at the School of Economics, when 4 years ago Andrew Altman, head of the Olympic Park Legacy Company, said, you know, the hardest nut to crack is the engagement, the ownership, the community building. We've done all the other stuff really well. We can pat ourselves on the back. We've got venues that will come down and go away. We've got multifunctional use. We've done all that. So there's got to, if you want that engagement, you've got to actually relinquish some control. You can't have the control and micromanage everything and expect people, the drones, to come along and, you know, they're not stupid. They need to have that ownership, and that dynamic, I believe, is something that is very hard for institutions to do. It's not traditionally within their makeup, whether it's an architect and an architect's relationship and the boundaries that they have with design, whether it's a planning authority. So you have a very cynical, as far as probably the council and local authorities think, unmotivated, unengaged community, and that's just not our experience. The moment people knew that this was long term, they came in their droves. They were like, great, I'm building a legacy. People like to do something if they feel that it's worth it. They don't necessarily want to make somewhere look good because it's a derelict site, so that it enables big corporations to then sell it and make money. So the volunteers are broken up into, I guess, 3 different groups. We have corporate volunteers that are from large and small scale businesses that are based locally. We're in the shadow of Canary Wharf. Local people who've discovered us, whether they're the lollipop lady from the local school, or whether they're from the homeless hostel up the road, or whether they just live locally, or whether they're a cyclist who's randomly found us. We have had about 800 local people come through the site in the last year, from 3 organisations last year coming. All 3 wanted to come back and actually solely supply people to us, because they felt that this project had there was possibility for a long-term relationship. We're here for the long term. They can see us from their offices. And it's a place where they can actually bring their families at the weekend to come to events. They can engage with it outside, just the volunteer day they put in once a year, It was something that's slightly more meaningful, perhaps. So you have this two very dynamic and creative communities, artists and boat users, who often treat the places they inhabit much in the same way as you do with short-term rented accommodation. They don't tend to engage with the outside universe. It's a bit like a sort of gated community almost, and they do not tend to invest much energy in using that creativity and the amazing community spirit that exists there outside the four walls that they occupy. So I felt that there was potential for creating a space where you had incomes from studios and incomes from moorings in a social enterprise model where that money would go back into the place they lived, but the deal is that they then have to put energy into the borough or the area they live. So rather than having their cheap place in the middle of nowhere in a warehouse somewhere and then swanning around the world and doing exhibitions in the ICA and other places, they actually have to bring some of that energy and that community spirit and that artistic expression to improve the areas they often occupy only for short periods of time. And by giving them that security, we had a deal there.
It provides a lovely view for Canary Wharf to look how the other half live. If you look across there, you can see that's Canary Wharf over there. In terms of the city, I think it's a nice little haven from the city, if anything. It's a nice little escape, isn't it, from all that kind of hubbub, because this is such a different atmosphere here on the dock.
We sit actually on a junction where you can walk 27 miles along the River Lee without crossing a road. There are kingfishers, cormorants and herons living right here in the city centre underneath Canary Wharf, and not one school child who goes to the Lee Eastleigh School 10 minutes up the road, named after the Lee, has ever seen a kingfisher, and not one of the students we brought here out of the 150 had ever been, 14 years old, had ever been to the Lee. We've negotiated a 999-year lease on a peppercorn rate for this site, in trust to the charity, so it can never be developed for housing or anything like that. We are recognising the fact that we're in an industrial area. We're not here to gentrify it, we're here to tell the story of all of that industry, but we're also here to open up the riverbank and preserve the nature that has taken a hold here over the last 25 years whilst there are so many brownfield sites.
Site, I think, used to be flats on this site, similar to kind of what's around here, but that was knocked down to make way for new development. And this site is in the meantime between that and whatever's being planned for this area. It's a part of regeneration for the area.
The council actually own the site, so when we first got here by going through a competition called Meanwhile London, then we won it, and we've got an agreement with the council now that they give us the land for free on a free lease. So every year we kind of go through a quick process of kind of handing over documents and making sure we used the site in the way they first set us out to do it, and if we comply with these rules then they give us the lease for the next year and so on and so on. So we've actually got this site till September 2015.
I see that the caravanserai is a wonderful model because there were different shapes and characters to the caravanserais as they went from China to Europe. They were obviously passed through all sorts of cultures and places, and some of them were urban and some of them were in the desert, and some of them would have been in ravines, some on top of a pass. So the actual physical character of a caravanserai, the only thing that it needs is to be defined as a space. During the competition we were actually thinking very hard about how we could use skilled labour very sparingly and how we could train up lots of people.
From the outside, all you see is the blue hoarding. When I found out about it on the website and I came in, they had all of the work from last year, the previous year, that was done. But the Flitst site, that was empty. That was a building site, you know, it was full of rubble. So the big change here was been seeing that develop, you know, from that empty space to a finished building.
What's been playing on my mind is the idea that if you can get 10 groups of people interested, then somehow there will be this resilient network of weak links that will create enough of a trampoline in the project to keep it going. And those are architecture students who need to learn some building skills or feel that they do. It's people who want to learn about collaborative design and collaborative consumption and service design, and it's also people who exhibit at Excel who might want to have a site where they can demonstrate some of their building materials.
During the summer we had several artistic workshops every Thursday. We had every morning the gardening club run by Valerie. Yes, I think that we had a commitment by the neighbors here. They asked also for their own allotments.
It's a bit of a challenge. It didn't kind of happen organically like we first hoped it would. We thought people might come and just see the space and say, we want to use that because we've already built this structure, and it was just. We're just hoping people come and say, I want that space for my project, for my exhibitions, for my trading. But that didn't happen as easy as we thought it was going to happen. The great thing about volunteers is that it's really good energy on site, but one of the downfalls of having volunteers is that they can't really afford to spend long periods on the project.
It's really a mood-dependent project, so depending on what the weather is like, the site looks either beautiful or dreary. Depending on the kind of energy in the team, the whole opportunity seems either kind of cataclysmic and exciting, or kind of like, oh, this is just a kind of last-ditch place for people who can't get a job. You know what I mean? It's very strangely volatile in its mood. And I think that's a confidence trick. It's kind of like trick of the light, you know, literally a trick of the light.
Between us, like a volunteer, we come from all the world, and I think it's a big success.
I think once there's people on site, then community will be coming in as well. It's just one of those things. The more people you have, and more people will want to come in.
With the local community, I think that really needs to be driven from either, I don't know, from the council or from some part of the community, perhaps like a school or one of the local universities, or a local body within the community itself.
I'm confident that with a slightly more helpful local authority, this is a goer, and it's a great, you know, a local authority who made it part of the 106 or something. It doesn't need huge amounts of money, but I mean, it needs, you know, a full-time member of staff, you know, or 2 half-time members to make it work. I think that there could be lots of different local authorities interested in, if they knew the extent of their liability, and they felt comfortable about the idea that some creative energy could be injected into a piece of land which otherwise is just hoarded. It's all sorts of places would find that useful, I think, to create a sense of safety in a, you know, rundown area, to kickstart some more confidence in the edge of a high street.
it was probably a much kind of slower process than it would have been if you, say, built a proper building on this site. And people, because they're here quite a lot, they'll see what community come in, who uses the site, and then I guess ideas about what we actually need starts to come about from that, rather than just imposing something on the site. It just becomes this kind of slow development, and hopefully with a lot of lessons learnt starts to get towards something that is right for the area. I don't necessarily think we're at that stage now, but because you're not making any massive developments on the site at any one time, there is a process for it to change and adapt to suit whatever's there.
Originally, when it was first set up, this land was derelict. Down there there's ruins of the gatehouse, which were the entry to a 12th century abbey, the Langthorne Abbey, which now lies under the tracks of the Jubilee line. So this site is protected by English heritage, hence the reason why it's not being developed. In the 60s, when they had this program to demolish slums in London, all the houses on this site were demolished. So the whole site was contaminated as well, because there was like factories. So when they started redeveloping the DLR site 7 years ago, the neighbours got together and got some funding from the Arts Council to commission some artists to come up with an idea for this site. Some people suggested like paving the whole thing and having like a fountain, and like somewhere came out the idea of creating like a community garden. Like in 1906, not far from here in Plaistow, there were some unemployed men who reclaimed a plot of land to start growing their own food, and the site was called the Triangle Camp. And that's in memory of those people that the raised beds are in a triangular shape.
The inspiration that came from that was really the fact that to have a garden which was for the local people, really, for anyone, whoever they are, and really to give people the opportunity to get involved in work which can have a positive outcome, i.e. growing food, producing creating a nice environment, sharing with people. So the main thing about the gardening club is that anyone can come, whatever ability they are, whatever age. Basically it's open to anyone and it's completely free. So a lot of people come who aren't necessarily gardeners, so obviously that requires quite a lot of instruction and training, I suppose, and sort of practical demonstration. People do get out of it the fact that what they've learnt here they can then take and use in their own gardens or in their work or whatever. You get groups of people who probably wouldn't otherwise come together and speak, so that's really good.
It's gone beyond just a gardening club now. It's more a social club where people come and meet. As I say, I used to live in Camden for 5 years, and I didn't know any of my neighbours. I've been here 3, and I can probably give you 60 names top of my head of people who come and enjoy the garden. So yeah, it has created a community. It has brought all the neighbours together, has improved safety, because if the place is maintained, people will respect it. This is an open space, so anyone can come in, so it's different from allotments or a lot of other communities gardening, because they are enclosed spaces. This one is open. The Friends of Abbey Gardens, the group, we've got like a concession from the council to run those raised beds and the gardening club. Newham is still the freeholder of this site.
So it is important that it's a park, and I think that's one of the important things about it, really. And I think there needs to be more places like this, because it's there's so many aspects to it, in the sense that it's sort of a public park that people can participate in. People can also, if they're interested, can actually put forward ideas for things that they want to do here, whether that's just to do with the planting and growing certain things, or even get involved in the charity itself and sort of suggest what direction maybe they want that to go in.
There's a core of about 60 volunteers that give about 120 hours of volunteering a week. The cost benefit, I think, overall in the grand scheme of things, £30,000 is nothing. But if I were to add in all the volunteers' time in the background, you can at least double, if not triple it.
It's actually, compared to other parks of this size, considering the range of stuff we're growing, running this project is relatively cheap for the fact that there's volunteer input, and a lot of the stuff we grow here on site with seeds. We do a lot of seed saving, and we use composted municipal waste, which is relatively cheap to come by.
This site was originally a temporary experiment for 1 to 3 years. We're now in the 5th year and it's still going strong.
My name's Sean Connor. I got involved with Cultivate through the job centre. Originally I'm a qualified plumber and electrician. My boss unfortunately passed away and got me basically unemployed because that's when the recession hit. So I got in contact with the job centre, which put me through to Cultivate London, and I started their traineeship. Within 4 months a position came up and I got the job as an apprentice, and I've been here now come up to 3 years in March. I was one of the first ever trainees here. When I first started it was just an empty car park. There wasn't one pole up for polytunnel, no nothing.
All of the sites that we're on, they would just be lying derelict, waiting for redevelopment. So we're putting them to use in a productive way until they're turned into something else. So it's just kind of maximizing space, using it to kind of, by operating from there, we're contributing to the community, contributing to the local economy, have environmental benefits. Our primary aim is to work with long-term unemployed youth, so NEET youth, not in employment, education or training, between the ages of 16 and 24, and get them on into employment. So we run a 4-month volunteer traineeship where we recruit youth from job centres, probation services and kind of the community at large, and they come and work with us on our site for 3 months, and they're here 3 days a week and are kind of involved in everything that we do. And then they have the option of also being involved in the customer facing activities like farmers markets and deliveries. Then the 4th month is spent working, we do put a little work placement with one of our partner organisations.
Cultivate as a company has quite a few contacts, like for example there's a printing company around the corner, they're always picking people up, but it's literally anything, to be honest. Being a grower, I basically look after the plants in the nursery, literally from the moment they're sown into trays, and we bring them up to a nice healthy state where they go on to the public, basically, who then grow them to their full potential. It was odd at first, but it was the initial, like, being outside, not being stuck at a desk, being very hands-on and physical. I personally prefer doing things that were hands-on. I'm a very active person, so that was the first thing that really caught my eye about it. When you actually start learning about like the biological side of things, it became even more interesting.
And the urban farm is the means to an end of providing work experience and training for these guys, and also funding us. So a lot of our income as a charity comes from sales of what we grow. And the kind of long-term goal is to move much closer to self-sufficiency. I would say that we have quite a significant social impact, and by operating on formerly derelict land, it's kind of all the other community things that come with that.
The project has grown hugely since I first started. When I first started here, like I said, there wasn't not one plant here. And since then, we've gone from concentrating on 5 different herbs up to a huge range of herbs to a huge range of vegetables and flowers then. So we've gone from 1 polytunnel up to 4 polytunnels on one site, and now we're expanding, and we've got potentially 3 sites 3 years later.
2011 was a bit of a false start. Didn't have a huge number of trainees we were working with either, but Pathways continued to support us through that. Didn't grow anything over the winter of 2011-2012, but started again in the spring of 2012 and had a much more successful growing season last year, but it was still not a huge amount of income. And then this past year, we had our feet in the ground in the spring, grew through the winter, hit the ground running, had built up a bit of a reputation for ourselves, and income has just gone like this, and even recruitment for trainees. The training program has been solidified over the past year as well into this. It was originally designed that this would kind of be like 3 to 4 months and 3 of them a year training programs. But this is the first year that it's kind of like properly happened, with recruitment in March, recruitment in June, recruitment in September.
Basically, I select the stock from potted stock here. I bring it round up to the Brentford market and I sell it to local people, which is always a great feel to get local people involved. They find it quite amazing that just behind in their back garden is 4 big polytunnels, and they're producing ranges of fruit, veg, flowers to sell to local people. So we have huge backing from the local people to keep this up.
I probably would have never noticed this part of Brentford at all if it wasn't for this. And I've noticed that ever since working for the company, I'm noticing other people's projects more now. And it's really nice just watching, in a sense, this sudden, like, it was almost secret. They keep it quite secluded from the world in a way, and until you actually get involved in it, you don't realise it's there. And it's just nice to watch everyone else develop as much as we do. So
most of the flats that are here were already here, but they've been developing the area quite a lot over the last 3 years. We've had to move this site once already. We're going to have to move it again in November because they're going to start developing here, which is always tricky to do. But yes, there's a lot of developing going up and a lot of flats going up, taking over these sort of temporary houses for us.
If we were just a charity, just running a training program, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but because our business is actually a very important part of what we do, to have that sort of huge upheaval every couple years is a big problem for our business. So we have to find somewhere that's a little more long-term.
This project has opened my eyes to where food comes from in general, and what kind of work goes into it. For example, when we grow tomatoes, we put them in the fridge. They can only last a week, maybe 2. The ones you buy in the shops, you put them into the fridge, and 2 months later they look like they're brand new still. So you can just guarantee what kind of chemicals they have sprayed on them. So I've specialised in food production this year, and I want to try and keep that up, and just trying to teach kids that tomatoes come off plants and not grown in the ground as like potatoes. So it's an interesting one to come across.
Food security is kind of there's more kind of interest growing around it. Urban growing is a part of it, and I think we have to be really creative with how we produce food in the future, now and moving forward, and using all the space that we can. Vertical growing, hydroponics, there's tons of really neat projects going on. If you're not allowed to experiment and fail, your likelihood of being successful is a lot lower. And that's one thing that we've been really lucky with, or fortunate to have, is a lot of freedom.
Things have dramatically changed since the end of the Olympics, because all of those organisations, the government, the amalgamated quangos have all had time to bed in, and now the focus is on legacy, and there is a belief that wasn't there before that this area is not just ripe for regeneration, it's happening. There are examples of it. So all eyes are on here, and suddenly, rather than being in the wrong place at the wrong time, we are pivotal to this area's transformation now.
I believe you want to work with the grain with these things, and other people will come on board afterwards, because some people are not initiators, some people are kind of joiners, so you don't want to wait for everybody.
It's great to have an idea to reclaim a plot of land that looks derelict, but you're going to need to run it. There's some responsibilities with it, and it's going to require a lot of time.
Why can't we set up in a corner of a park? And I think if food growing, or even just urban growing in general, became a sort of part of a policy, and we don't need that much space. If we could take over a corner of I don't know, Hyde Park or something and grow food there and that be legally okay and publicly okay, then I think that would do, and have like a long-term thing if we could set up and have, yeah, I got 10 years here, then we could do great things with that sort of space.
In terms of the long-term stay of global generation on the development side, there's interesting kind of conversations being had by the developers and by other people about how that could happen, and that, you know, that was a preferred thing, that ideally that could happen. But when you've got something that's pretty much planned, there's a blueprint for what's going to happen with the land, we've still got to remain in that temporary, mobile kind of approach. So who knows, we might end up on a barge or a rooftop somewhere or something like that. So yeah.
But we don't know, and I don't think the developer knows either. I mean, as soon as this land is sold, and then, you know, then that new owner will want us off. So we have to go somewhere else, or we finish, I don't know. I mean, it's been a good run. We've had you know, to have a site like this in the middle of London has been an awesome experience. And I think we've touched a lot of lives as well, in many ways.